Welcome back, one and all, to PodStance, the PunkStance Podcast. It is me, once again, doing a little intro for this one, as I believe this episode could be nearly 2 hours long. We chatted for so long, it was great. I think I did like 3 separate Zoom meetings just to get all the information in. So I'm really excited for this one. Just want to send a massive thank you to everyone as well. I just finished up recording with another individual who's going to be on a release ramble in the coming days, or weeks even. I don't know, there's so much going on. I'm so busy. I'm looking to move house. I've been a bit all over the place with work and stuff, so it's a really busy time for me, but I don't want that to take away the fact that I'm very appreciative for everyone listening to the podcast and wanting to get involved and be a part of it. I'm so grateful that people are beginning to reach out and ask for the opportunity to come on. It's a really lovely feeling to have, so thank you very much. Thank you everyone who listens, who gets involved, and everyone who's a part of it. I simply cannot thank you enough, but I'm not going to keep you for that long. I want to get straight into this one. This is with a guy called Ian Zapcic, once again from the US. I believe he's a university professor that specializes in studying men online and mental health issues with men, so he was absolutely perfect for this kind of podcast to talk about his love for punk rock music, modern punk rock music, specifically the Gaslight Anthem, who we all know and love, but also to talk about his experiences with mental health, his own and other people's. It was such an incredible thing to listen to, and such a genuinely lovely and caring man who just loves his music and loves his job. And I can't thank him enough for coming on. Thank you very much, Ian. I appreciate your patience with this one, because we did speak for a very long time, but it was lovely. I honestly, this is probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite, that I've brought out in a while. So thank you very much again, and I won't keep you any longer. I'll see you on the other side. Well, welcome on, firstly. I'm glad to have you. You've followed up from the Reddit page. We've actually managed to organize something, which is great. I'm just surprised. What is it that what's brought you to being on a podcast like this, as it were?
I don't know. I just I love talking about different things. I love talking about music. I love, being very long-winded about the things I care about and the things I'm passionate about, and it just seemed like a cool opportunity. Right around the same time, I had also gotten someone who reached out to be on his podcast on my professional side. So I was kind of like, yeah, let's take some opportunities to put myself out there. So,
Well, why not? What would the professional one be?
so I am a university professor,
Oh,
and
wow. Awesome.
I do research on men's issues online. If the manosphere broadly is one of my research topics, if you're familiar with that term. And I had done a research study over the last couple years that I published on that had to do with women who'd been in relationships with manosphere men and the way they'd treated them. And I published on that over the summer. And this guy just found me on LinkedIn and wanted to talk about it. So I was like,
Wow.
cool, let's do it.
That's a hell of a contrary to what you actually about the music that you're going to talk about, I'm sure.
It is in some ways, and it's not. I see a lot of connection. I'm in my chosen field is social work, and so given that this is like a conversation about mental health and things like that, I see a lot of connection between it, because especially to social isolation and loneliness is one of the big drivers for radicalization in terms of a lot of social and political viewpoints. And so again, I don't necessarily, being that I'm very passionate about music that thrives on community, I think that I do think there's a lot of maybe not initially apparent, but I do think that there's crossover there. So.
Well, I mean, that comes straight to the album in question. I was actually listening to it just earlier. I think Wikipedia says one thing, but Spotify says another in terms of the years that they came out. But if you'd like to announce what the album is and what its importance to you, as it were, be it professional or personal.
Sure. So the album is the 59 Sound by the Gaslight Anthem. My relationship with this album is kind of an interesting one. And so first things first, this is, I think, something that I feel like you can't talk about this band and can't talk about this album, or maybe some people can, but I'm from New Jersey, right? And so that's like a really important thing. There's a really interesting, when you know people from New Jersey, when you talk about New Jersey here in the States, it's this weird thing where kind of the butt of everyone's joke, especially on the East Coast. And yet there's a lot of really important, really meaningful things that come from New Jersey, and people kind of know it. And it's this interesting thing where, there's a comedian named Chris Gethard, and he had a podcast that recently ended. They did it for a few years, and it was kind of about the importance of New Jersey and what New Jersey means to them. And one of the things he said in an episode once that I really liked was he used the phrase "born to come close," right? And that was that's something that I really relate to personally, and kind of just growing up here was something that I think that I always kind of understood, this idea that there's something bigger out there, and yet to quote the Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home, right? And Jersey exists in that duality, I think, for a lot of people, where it's like, this is the place that formed me and it's really important, but then also I know that there's a great big world out there that I want to go explore. So all of that kind of, I think, and maybe that's a little romantic, and maybe that's part of the reason I love this album so much, because it is a very romantic album, not necessarily in like a love song kind of way, but it's an album that romanticizes a certain place in a certain time. And so realistically, if I'm being more specific here, the importance of this album to me is, I had just graduated college. It was 2008. I had graduated college, and in May of 2008, and very tumultuous time. My social life changed a lot in my last year of college. I was coming into my own in a lot of different ways and trying to figure out what the next step was. And college was really good for me. Growing up, I was a kid that didn't really fit in middle school and high school. And so going to college was really awesome, because I found people who were like me, and we just got to hang out all the time, right? And I was an arts kid. I took a lot of theater classes, communication classes, film classes. And so it was a lot of like this kind of stuff, right? Talking about the art that's meaningful to us, and trying to find our ways to replicate that. And it was great. I just got to be with my friends all the time, and it was very communal in a lot of ways. And then it just ended. And then it's suddenly like, now you have to go into this real world. And so I was kind of bouncing around for the summer. I was moved back in with my parents, and my sister, I have an older sister, and she was getting ready to move out, like kind of on her own. She graduated college a couple years ahead of me, was like, I'm ready to move out on my own. And she had a roommate lined up, was a girl she'd been friends with for a long time. And at the last minute, this girl backed out, couldn't do it. So she's like, hey, I'm trying to move out. I've got this place. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, I don't know. I don't have anything else going on. Sure. And so I move out with really no job prospects lined up. I'm like trying to do this like weird unpaid internship, and I'm working at a restaurant for tips, and it's just not great. And I'm just like, immediately, this is like September-ish of 2008, and I'm just miserable, right? I just want to be back at school. All my friends are back there. They're all hanging out. They're all posting pictures on Facebook. They're all, it's just one of those things. I feel very alone. Even my sister, like, I moved in a couple days before her because of like our schedules. And so like the first few days I was just sitting there with like no furniture, and like just watching like the same like 2 DVDs over and over again. I was in just kind of a miserable place, and I felt like there was all this change going on. And I was in another situation where I felt like I wasn't fitting in. And I was aware of who the Gaslight Anthem was, right? They were coming up in Jersey at the time. When I was still in college, there was a website that I used to go on a lot that doesn't exist anymore, but I always loved it. It was called the NJ Scene. It was a message board that was all like New Jersey scene related stuff. So it was like promoting people's bands. This is back in the day of MySpace, promoting shows. That was a big part of it. People trying to form bands or trying to like get on shows. It was a really cool space. And the one of the bands that people were talking about constantly on that site was Gaslight, the Gaslight Anthem, the Gaslight Anthem. They're so good. I saw them here. They played the Court Tavern. They played this house show. They played there. And like, I tried listening to them, and it just didn't do anything for me. I don't even remember what the song I heard was. I was like, it doesn't really do anything. And then, I go about my life. And so a couple months later, it's late September, early October. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, but it's the fall. And I go to New York City. I was living in North Jersey, about, an hour bus ride, but really like 10 miles, 12 miles from the city. I go into the city to see to this day, I think one of the best bills that, like, I can't believe they put this tour together. It was Gaslight was the first opener, and then it was Thrice, Alkaline Trio, and Rise Against were the headliners, right?
Wow.
Just an unreal lineup. And at the time, again, I didn't like Gaslight, but I was like, I don't really care. Like Thrice, Alkaline Trio, and Rise Against, those are three of my favorite bands. Yeah, I'm gonna go see it. And so I get there with my friend, and we're kind of catching up and just talking, and Gaslight comes out, and I just remember so clearly. I was like, I don't really care about this band, whatever. I'm like talking with my friend, and they start playing, and they open with Great Expectations, which is the opening track on the 59 sound. And, there's the little guitar intro, and then it kicks in, and he says, Mary, the station is playing every sad song I remember like we were alive. And she's still talking to me. And I'm like, hold on, like something is happening here, and I don't know what it is, and I'm caught really off guard by it. But like, and then just for that whole set, I was just locked in, and I bought the CD from the merch table like right then and there. And that night I went home, and I like loaded all the songs on my computer, because that's back in the day when you still had to do that.
Yeah.
It was just like over and over and over again. And that album to me just became so important, because it's an album that, like I said before, like really to me celebrates nostalgia and wears it on its sleeve. It romanticizes the past. And it's a song about, or I'm sorry, an album about, like, in a lot of ways coping with, changing stages of life. And I just felt, I don't know, like it was just such a cool thing, because I was feeling this way, and I felt very trapped by the choices that I'd made, and I felt very trapped just by the changing of life, right? I graduated. I don't get to be in the system that I thrived in anymore. And it was just so refreshing to hear that there were other people out there that felt like I did, and other people that kind of don't exactly necessarily fit in, but are still trying to make their way. And then, the I don't know if I'm jumping too much ahead, but the last track on the album, called The Backseat, which traditionally their set lists are a lot different now than they used to be, but for a long time they were always like, that was the last song they'd play. They always said it was a really, really important song to them. And to me, it's such a great album closer, because it's a very dynamic song. It goes up and down, it builds, it breaks. But really, the song itself, to my interpretation, is always just about like, you're going to get through it. Things are going to get better. You got to keep pushing. And, and then if you can find the people or the things you can rely on and be that person for someone else, like, it's going to get better. Right. And so, the one lyric from that song, that's very famous, is, if you never let me go, I'll never let you down. And, so to me, that was just that was what I needed at that moment in my life, was people being like, hey, it's okay to feel this way. And, sometimes things suck and they're not the way you want them to be. But you just got to keep pushing forward, and someday it's going to get better, and you might be that person or that thing for somebody else.
I think it's such a great thing to mention. It's such a tangible feeling that a lot of people understand. I was listening to, as you were saying that, and knowing that I did almost exactly the same thing. Finished school, went to university, did 3 years there, and then just came straight back and lived at home for a bit with my parents. And there's so many albums that I used to listen to. In fact, I'm even going to visit a friend who's still at the same university tomorrow, who's
Mm.
still based there, who's still studying there. And I've now moved to a different place and have taken a job up and changing roles. And, life takes you on a route that you never really expect. But you have these songs that almost give you that throwback of, this happened, and I'm glad that it did, but there's still a lot more ahead of me as well. And it seems like that this album came at almost the perfect time for you.
It really, really did. And, it's one of those things where, I'm usually a person who I tend to, how do I put it? I react kind of negatively to hype, right? If everyone is telling me this is the best thing, you're gonna love it, I tend to treat it with a bit of skepticism. So, like, for instance, and I think this is a relevant thing when we're recording this because the movie just came out. When I was in college is when Wicked, it was like, I guess, end of high school, but like into college is when Wicked the musical, came out on Broadway. And being from where I'm from in Jersey, like we're an hour from New York City. So it was the type of thing where like I knew people that were going to see it. There were like, you had to be on like a 2-year waiting list to get tickets and all this kind of stuff. And being a theater kid, like I go to college and everyone is talking about Wicked, 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 Wicked. You got to see Wicked. It's the best thing. There was some girl I remember during like freshman orientation or something. She said her dream in life was to play Elphaba on Broadway. Like that's how much of a thing it was, which made me just like not want to see Wicked because I was just like, I don't want to be part of this weird hype cycle. And in a much, much, much smaller way, that's how it felt towards like Gaslight, on this website that I was going on where people were just talking about them, what felt like all the time. And like I said, I tried listening to one song maybe, and who knows, maybe it was because I had this impression in my mind of who they are and what they're doing that I was like, it might have even been the type of thing. Cause I'll tell you what, I also love their first album now. So like clearly whatever I would have heard at that point in time, I now have an affection for. But it's just one of those things where I'm like, at the time, it was probably like, I don't care about this band because everybody likes them. And, then like you said, it was one of those things where I'm like, no, they're exactly what I need at this moment in my life.
It's like you needed to find them on your own. You didn't need someone to
Yeah,
guide you. That you just had to
I
have
think
that
so.
that epiphany where all of a sudden, oh my God, I do actually like them. What was I thinking?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting you mention a lot of like being a theatre kid and all all this interest in that kind of thing. I studied English at university as well, and
Mhm.
one thing I noticed is that a lot of the album, some of the titles, some of the lyrics are almost directly related to a lot of literature and culture and that kind of thing. So Great Expectations is obviously a Dickens novel.
Mhm.
You've got one that's straight up called Film Noir, which is very
Mhm.
direct. And then the second to last song I saw was "Here's Looking at You, Kid," which is the line
Mhm.
from Casablanca with Humphrey
Yes.
Bogart. Is that another thing that drew you to it, or is that just a coincidence?
So it definitely helped. I think, one of the other things that's interesting about this album is there's so many references, and I'm not like I am very much not a classic rock person. Certain classic rock. There's a lot of. I'll be honest, and I'm not just saying this to gas you up. A lot of like the British classic rock. My dad's favorite band of all time is The Who, and so like I went to see them a few times with my dad when I was like in high school and college when they did some of their tours, and so those were really great moments. I love a lot of their music. There's Zeppelin stuff that I like. It was just like that type of thing where like there's a lot of references on this album on the 59 sound to a lot of like classic rock and soul and things that I don't even know the references to. Like I know that there's I was listening to it earlier today and there's a song, there's a line in Great Expectations where he says it's funny how the night moves, humming a song from 1962, and I know that that's a reference to Night Moves. And in the liner notes I remember there were all these different like references or things where it would like be specific, like this is from this is a reference to that. Lit a cigarette on a parking meter when he in Old White Lincoln, things like that. There's just all these references. So I think even more than just like things like film noir or Here's Looking at You, Kid, I think to me what I liked was it was just, if even it wasn't something I was familiar with or that I knew the reference, I just really liked that it was like, here's what got me to this point, you know what I mean? So like it was very clearly like referential in a way that was respectful and a way that was like, again, like I'm paying homage to the things that brought me here. But I do there is a theatrical nature to it that I think you're right about that I also like. And I just want to point out specifically, like, Here's Looking at You, Kid, like that song specifically. I just love that song. And I love the way it's unabashed in its romanticism. It's again, a nostalgic song. The theme of the song is like, I could have been the person you wanted and you did something else, right? And so like, and it's talking to different women in his life. And and what's the one line in that song where he says like, I would have gotten you a ride out of that town you despised. You tell, I forget which woman it is, when she asks why. And then there's also the line, boys will be boys and girls have those eyes that'll cut you to ribbons sometimes. And all you can do is just wait by the moon and bleed if it's what she says you ought to do. And like for me at 22, 23 years old, that was just like, oh, like, you know what I mean? Like, because I was like, just very much kind of wanting to be that person for somebody. But at the same time, there were a couple people in my life that I was like, you know, head over heels for, and yet like that we just had these complicated interactions where it was just like, I'll do what you say, and I'll hope that one day you'll see me in the way that I want to be seen. So so all of that was just stuff that was speaking to me and really making me feel like it was kind of like this little missing piece, this little missing jigsaw piece that I didn't know I was missing.
And it seems like tonally it's very all over the place, but I think that it sort of
Yeah.
affected you in that way as well. Obviously, you have a sense of nostalgia for it, but at the time, it almost affirmed the feelings of loneliness and upset that you had. So it kind of both helped and hindered you in the same way.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It was, but it felt like companionship, I think is a good way of thinking of it, because you're right. Like it's, and if the album didn't end on such a positive note, you know, I don't know if we'd be having this conversation, because I don't know if it would have meant as much to me. It was very much this, like I said, it was like a lot of the album feels like Community. Um, and it feels like, and not just Community, but also, you know, Brian Fallon is, and the guys in the Gaslight Anthem, they're a few years older than me. So it also felt like Community, and having like I have my older sister. She doesn't listen to like this kind of music, and her life experiences are different than mine. It sort of felt like there's people out there like who've been through this, and you know, like can just see a little bit further down the road. We can all feel a little lonely together, and then at the end of the day, it'll ideally get a little better.
I guess you look back on it now as that word companionship was great. Like, I think albums and specific songs as well really have an impact on you where you almost go back to them like an old friend, and it
Yeah,
reminds you of that time and sort of uplifts you in a way that nothing else does.
I completely agree. I think that, and again, I'm someone who, it just, for me, like memory is something. I have a really strong memory, even as I get older. So it's just one of those things where like I can remember so clearly the place and the time and the, you know, and the era of my life that it was in. And it was just, it's an interesting thing, because like I said, I was revisiting it today, and it's like it just brings you right back.
Mm, absolutely. And I think one thing that I saw specifically in the lyrics of the titular track, the second one, 59 Sound, I think the final lyric of the chorus was, "Did you hear your favorite song one last time?"
Yeah.
And I think that has perfectly encapsulated what you were saying, that it comes back to having that one album, that one song, just all the nostalgia that comes through and just affects you in that way. Are there any other songs that particularly sort of hit you in a way on the album? Any lyrics that you remember that particularly stuck
Um,
with you?
so I think the 59 sound is a good one to talk about for a second, because the other thing that kind of happened at that era of my life, as I was transitioning from going from, you know, college to, we always, at least here in the States, everyone refers to it as like being a real adult kind of thing, you know. That song in particular was impactful because even now, I've been pretty fortunate in my life compared to other people I know. I've not had to deal with death like super, super closely, but it's something that I'm honestly terrified of, and it's something that I think about a lot and I have an interest in. And I think, you know, one of the things, like I was teaching a class last year, and hopefully I'll get to teach again sometime in the future, related to like death, dying, and grief. I think it's a fascinating topic. I think the way we approach end of life and transitioning, and different cultures having their different specific rites and rituals, I think it's endlessly fascinating for me. But like I said, it's also something that I have a lot of fear around. And so that was something that I was really starting to wrestle with at that point in my life. So hearing a song again, where it's really focused and fixated on this idea of like, what's, you know, what is it like when when it happens, and just kind of questioning like what's going to happen, and how do we go? It's not a song that gives you answers. It's just a song that leaves you with questions. And that there's a little hope that it's peaceful. So that's a big standout for me. The other, there's two lyrics on two different songs that I related to, that I want to mention, that I think are, how do I put it? I think that there's a similarity that I want to bring up. One of the things that's also very romantic, I think, on the album is this idea of, like I said, not always entirely fitting in, and not always being exactly the right person. It's in different songs. It's in Great Expectations. It's in Here's Looking at You, Kid. But there's High Lonesome, which is probably my favorite track on the album. And the one lyric from the chorus is, Maria came from Nashville with a suitcase in her hand. I always kind of sort of wished I looked like Elvis. In my head, there's all these classic cars and outlaw cowboy bands. I always kind of sort of wished I was someone else. So I like related to that, right? This idea of like, I want to be the version of attractive, the version of cool, the version of whatever it is that another person is looking for. And I never quite exactly felt like I was that thing. So that's sort of part one. And then the other side of that, to me, the other lyric I really love, that again I think is sort of like a companion or sibling lyric, is and a very sort of romantic lyric, is in the song Miles Davis and the Cool, which is a very romantic song in my opinion. He has a line where he says, so now I got up my nerve and I got me a stone. With a flick of the wrist and a turn of the key, you just fall in my arms. And he's kind of talking about, throwing a rock at her window and getting her to come down type of thing. And I just, again, to me, that was always... And then there's another song that's called The Patient Ferris Wheel. Like that, to me, I grew up near the beach. I grew up near the shore with Ferris wheels and rides and carnivals and fairs, and just all of this, all of the lyrics on this album, they didn't speak to a reality that I'd ever experienced. And they didn't speak to a reality that I think that, I mean, maybe, I don't want to presume anything about a person I don't know, but like, I don't know that Brian Fallon necessarily experienced that at the way he's romanticizing it either, because he's talking about, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s kind of stuff, or like, that's at least how I interpret it. That's how it feels to me. And again, it's, to me, that was always very, like, I liked that because it was very romantic, and it took the imagery and the things that I always found special and magical in my life, and it elevated them to this place of like, what if they were special and magical and not just, the normal and everyday.
And those themes of identity that you mentioned, and being the person you want to be, do you feel like the album influenced you to be more of that person? Do you feel more confident in yourself now because of it, or do you think it was just sort of an incidental part of it?
That's a great question. I would like to believe so. I think that there's, there were a lot of things that happened around that time that I think, I'm going to say yes, because there was at a certain point an effort that I had to decide on to put myself out there. I have a very strong memory of, I was working, like I said earlier, at a restaurant at the time, and there was a guy that I worked with there, and there was a bar. He lived like 15 minutes from where we worked. There was a bar that did like a service industry night, and a bunch of people were going out, and it was a couple nights before Christmas. I remember this. And so he invites me to come out, and it ended up being, I thought a bunch of people from work were just going to come. It ended up being me and him, and then mostly just people like from his neighborhood that he had grown up with. And we hung out the whole night, and he was really kind to me, and he was like such a good dude. And he says to me at one point after, or like, later in the night, he's with his friends he's been friends with since like, I don't know, elementary school, middle school. And he says something about, he's like, you're a great guy. And he's like, these guys, they're my friends. They've been my friends my whole life, and they're great dudes. I love them. But like, I don't always feel like I can talk to them about the kind of stuff that you and I can talk about. And I just really value that. And like, that was so meaningful to me at that time. That was, again, a piece that I didn't know was missing until it was filled in. And it was just kind of like, okay, again, like this decision to put myself out there. I could have said, hey, I'm not going to go to the bar tonight. I don't really, I'm just going to go home, go to sleep. It's right before Christmas. It's busy. Like I could have made any number of excuses. And then that carried over into, after the new year and into the spring, I was getting a lot closer with a couple different people. And I did, have some really amazing and meaningful social experiences. A friend of mine and I sometimes actually refer to that period as the magic year, because it just felt like everything started clicking into place for both of us personally, socially, all that kind of stuff. And and I think that it also doesn't, it doesn't come as the biggest surprise. It took a while. It wasn't overnight, but within a few months, in the spring of the following year, so it would have been like early 2009, in the spring of the following year, guess what? I'm like meeting people, getting phone numbers, going on dates, and I end up eventually, by the summer in a relationship. And it's like one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I think it really did come down to just needing to put myself out there more and needing to like embrace, okay, it's gonna get better, but you gotta push through it.
That's amazing. Knowing that an album can almost build your confidence in that way, just knowing that it can get you out there.
It absolutely did. And I remember, I don't, I've seen that band play a million times now. And, but I'm trying to remember if this was the next time I saw them. I think it was after that, that first time when they were opening for, Alkaline Trio Thrice, Rise Against. And it was I went to a show at the Stone Pony in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And it was just like, I went alone. I remember it was like a Friday night and they played really late. I got there. I was like, they didn't start playing till like, I don't know, maybe 10:30. And it was just like perfect. You know what I mean? And just one of those things where, and like I said, so if you track the timeline, I first hear the album in like September, October of 2008. It's really pushing me through. And then I feel like going to that show was a really great, like a refresher, in the sense that like, I think the magic might have just been starting to ebb a little bit, in terms of, I don't want to say wear off, because it was still very meaningful to me. But I think one of those things where, I was maybe running out of juice a little bit, and then I go and see them and it's like right back there again. And I'm like, this is perfect. So.
Wow. And they've had such a wide discography as well. I mean, 59
Yeah.
Sound is just one of their, and you said their first album you really like as well. Obviously, the 59 Sound, for those who don't know,
Sink or
is their,
Swim is their first one. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm a big fan. I would say that, I don't know. I'm the type of person where, my top 10 would change, given day of the week or month of the year. But if I had to, if there's bands that are always going to be in the top 10 or even the top 5, Gaslight's definitely them for me. And I've found something to enjoy and really connect with, on every one of their albums.
and they had, I think it was History Books is their most recent
Yes.
one from last year, and they
Mm-hmm.
did the expanded deluxe version this year.
Yeah.
Have there been any other albums or any other songs outside of the 59 Sound that have influenced you in the same way, or is it just that one album that you keep coming back to?
So, I mean, like I said, I love their discography a lot. The last album that they put out before they went on their hiatus, in it was 2014, I believe it came out, was Get Hurt. And a lot of people didn't like that album. Stylistically, it was very different. I very much enjoyed it and listened to it a lot. And the last track on the album is it's I think it's a divisive song. It's got this sort of like almost power ballady kind of like sort of vibe.
Is this Dark Places?
It's Dark Places,
Yeah, I
yeah.
know that. I know
And
that one.
I should say the last song on the like album, as it were, because Gaslight is a band. If anyone out there is not as familiar with them, they are a band for whom like every album's got somewhere between like 3 and 5 bonus tracks, and depending on this version, depending on that version. And one of the things I've always appreciated them as a live band is that they will play all of those songs, right? Like there's no, some bands will like put out, this was a B-side or this was just like a bonus track, and they're like, it almost doesn't count as part of their catalog. Gaslight will play anything. So you will hear songs that like, again, was on like the Japanese release or the iTunes exclusive or whatever. So, but that being said, so Dark Places is the last song on the last song in like the main part of the album, and the chorus of the song, he says, "If I thought it would help, I would carve your name into my heart." And in the end of 2015, I was in a master's program. I was really stressed out. I was going through a lot of just dealing with that, and another sort of like already like sensing I was about to enter another transition period. I was about to turn 30, and I was dating somebody, and we had on its surface a really good relationship, and she was a great person, and was really supportive of me. A big part of the reason I ended up in the master's program was because of her. And Gaslight was also something that we bonded over, right? Like that was a big early on in our relationship, especially. Like we both loved that band, and we bonded over them and going to see them and, talking about them and listening to them and stuff. And at a certain point, I just like realized the way that I saw the rest of my life going and the direction I was headed in and the way she did just weren't compatible. And which sucks. And it was really over the course of like, I'd say probably 5 or 6 months that the relationship kind of dwindled, and then we eventually broke up. And again, it's not because she was a bad person, and I'd like to believe it's not because I was a bad person, but it's just one of those things where we weren't the right match, and because our goals were no longer aligned. And so that album, and especially that song, was really meaningful to me in this way of like, I had a lot of guilt about what was happening, but it was like, I also can't make things any better, like, because it's just a misalignment. So there's that element. And then, obviously, there's also a bonus track on that album that they would play a lot live, Have Mercy, which is an excellent track. And that's another, the one line at the end of that song, now your pretty horses run wild and free. You can go and find a lover, baby, better than me. Talking snow for days with your friends in LA. Have mercy. And it just, like this idea that person's going to move on and you're going to move on. And it was also like kind of something I reflected on a lot. And then, and then they broke up as a band or went on hiatus or whatever. And I was very lucky that I got to see them do their 2018 like 10-year for the 59 sound, which was really great. After that, I kind of didn't think they were going to be a band ever again, and I sort of resigned myself to that. It's the same thing with my other probably top band of all time is Midtown. The fact that they've played a few shows and been somewhat active over the last couple of years has been like another great joy of my life. But when Gaslight announced they were going to be a band again and they were putting out a new album, I was really, really excited. And the I think it was the first single they put out, Positive Charge, was also something that I just reflected on a lot and really, again, just sort of like I very much love that this is a band that like I've been able to grow with, and like even in their different eras, I can find things that are very applicable to me. I graduated with my PhD a couple years ago, and I was in Ohio. I'm back in New Jersey now, which is very exciting. But before I was back in New Jersey and I was still in Ohio, again, it was another transition period. And it was another what's going on here and what's the next step. And it's I have a long-term partner now. We're married now, and she's wonderful and super, super supportive. And so that part of my life, the like searching for that person, that part of my life is over. And I say that in a positive way because I found that person. But now there's like the other side, which is like, how am I going to develop my career for the rest of my life and take that in the direction that I want? So again, in this transition period, and they put out this song, and he says, I need a spark, I need a positive charge, plug it into my veins, let me love my life again. And you're just like, okay, like all right, like I get what you're saying, man. Like you're still in that spot where you're still, I think any good band will have that thing where they stay reflective. Like I think in my opinion, and it's not everyone's going to necessarily, in my opinion, one of the things that's a really great source of topics to write about is remaining self-reflective, right? And so are you a fan, Nick? Are you a fan of the Wonder Years?
Well, I was going to get to this actually,
Okay.
but yes, I am. I'll follow up on that afterwards.
Sure. So I think one of the things that I always thought was really interesting, that Wonder Years, another band that I have come to love, but I have a complicated relationship because of fan base and hype, right? Like I have a thing. They have a very special place in my heart, but also something where I have sometimes like pumped the brakes a little bit. But the reason I bring them up is, obviously one of the sort of rallying cries from the Upside is "I'm not sad anymore." And after, I remember specifically after The Greatest Generation came out, Soupy saying in like some interview or something along the lines that those three albums, The Upside, the Upside, Suburbia, and The Greatest Generation, he referred to it as like something of a trilogy about him like dealing with his depression and anxiety and working through it. And I started to see people saying things in like comment sections on like Reddit or like wherever online, where they were almost making it seem um, like that quote meant that he was saying he doesn't have anxiety or depression anymore, or whatever he deals with. I don't want to speak for him, but they were making it seem like his mental health struggles were now gone, that he used those albums to work through it. And I remember feeling like sort of frustrated by that, because I'm like, that's not how mental health works, right?
Mm.
Like these are, for lack of a better way of putting it, generally chronic illnesses, and we can experience periods, sometimes even very, very long periods of remission, but it doesn't ever fully go away, and sometimes it's going to creep back in different ways. And I think that the material they've put out since then reflects that, right? Because then the next album, the first track, or the first track they put out and the first real song is Cardinals, right? And that's like, okay, like we can't argue that it's not there anymore, because he's already talking about dealing with the struggles and stresses of being a person that other people rely on. And so so similarly with Gaslight Anthem, the reason I bring this up is because what I was saying is I love history books because it is a very self-reflective album. It's an album that points out that if you look at interviews with Gaslight since they started playing full time again and why they did what they did, Brian Fallon talks a lot about how during COVID he was doing a lot of these like Zoom shows and just writing solo material, and just kind of felt he's like, we're all isolated in our homes, and he's said that basically he's like, the one thing I wanted to do was be on stage playing loud rock music with my friends again. And so so it's a very self-reflective album, again, in this way of like reflecting on like what does matter to me at this point in my life. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up and just talk about the well that is self-reflection, and recognizing when it's okay to say I'm not sad anymore, and then it's okay for a week later to be like, you know what, I'm still kind of sad, like it's an okay thing to look back and be like, I need this spark. I need a positive charge. I need something like back in my life that's gonna make me feel the way that I used to.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
I think the thing with mental health, especially, is that it's not that binary. Like you don't just
yeah,
feel either really
absolutely.
good or you feel really bad. It's a very complex. I mean, I've got to take my meds in about 2 hours, so I'm very aware of how fluctuating it can be. And I think, particularly, I think I was going to mention the Hum Goes On Forever, their album about 2 years ago.
Hmm.
That particularly goes on about the stress of him now being a parent and living his life as a much older person and looking back on the life he's lived and the kind of anxiety and problems and pressures that come from being slightly older.
Yeah.
And it's a long-standing conversation and a long-standing feeling that so many people deal with, maybe even yourself included, I don't know. But I think a lot of the time it's the way people illustrate it is far more complicated than people realize. And a lot of people
Yes.
just jump in and go, oh, well, exactly that example. Like, oh, no, he doesn't have anxiety. Of course he doesn't, because he's written this specific thing. And
Right.
there's no correlation between those two things.
And our brains are really good at tricking us. So I don't want to in any way imply that when he said I'm not sad anymore, or when he said that quote about like those three albums being a trilogy of dealing with his anxieties, I don't know the man, and I wish him the best. So I don't want to be like, no, he was lying. I think that it's at that point in his life, it was probably true.
Mm.
And then as you're mentioning, their recent stuff, he's a parent now, and he has stresses and strains, and his job requires him to go all over the US and all over the world for months at a time and not be with his children, or figure out a way to make it financially viable for his family to come with him. I don't know how they tour. I know different bands do it differently. But nevertheless, like that's a whole other, guess what? It's a brand new set of strains and things to potentially be have anxiety about. You have other human beings to worry about now, and your job is to keep them alive. I'm sure I'm not a parent, but I know the conversations I've had with my friends who are parents, with my own parents. I don't think there's a parent alive who's never lost sleep over worrying about their kids. And so again, it may have been true when The Greatest Generation came out that he was through or in remission, or however you want to think of it, with his anxiety, or at least in a situation where on the spectrum, as you're talking about, he was much more to the side of not having symptoms and not having those feelings. And I imagine in the time since, there have been moments or perhaps even long periods where it's swung back the other way, because that's just how it works.
Yeah, and I think that the number of bands, particularly in this kind of spectrum of music, deal and talk about that a lot and in much more detail than other bands do. I've noticed that I was going to go on because you mentioned the Wonder Years. You're obviously wearing a Menzinger t-shirt.
I am wearing a Menzingers t-shirt right now.
Everyone can't see that. I'm wearing a Story So Far t-shirt or jumper.
Nice. Okay.
Because obviously big fan. But are there any other bands in that obviously you're a big American punk rock fan,
Sure.
to narrow it down. Are there any other bands within that field that have come close to being as influential as the Gaslight Anthem? Now that you've mentioned the Wonder Years and the Menzinger t-shirt, I figured there must be a few more.
Certainly. There's one specific instance I want to mention, and then there's one band that I'll talk about more generally, because it's a little bit, they're the ones I would say. I would say definitely the Menzingers. Definitely. I am not, again, I'm not like a diehard Wonder Years fan, but there have been times where they've been that band for me. But the two things I'll mention is that, so as I mentioned earlier, I moved to Ohio. I moved in the summer of 2018 to Ohio from New Jersey, to get my PhD at Ohio State. And I have always been a big fan of Hit the Lights. They're from Ohio.
I adore it.
Originally.
They're Cleveland, aren't they? Are they Cleveland?
Lima, which is this very weird rural town in like it's like 2 hours outside of Columbus. It's not near anything. I taught a class that was I taught it virtually over Zoom like this, but it was I was based in Columbus, but it was through the Lima campus. But it's like middle of nowhere. And so but Hit the Lights, they've just always been an important band for me. And I don't remember what month it was. It was still winter. It was cold, maybe like February, March-ish of 2019. So I'd been out in Ohio for, maybe 6 months. And there was a weird, it just like a lot of transition had happened for me moving to Ohio. So I had been through a breakup and then immediately met the woman who's my wife now, which obviously it's a positive thing that we're married, but there's two things that can happen, right? Like you can be still dealing with the emotions and the feelings that you had in one relationship while also being able to be in another.
Mm.
She was still in New Jersey, so we were doing the long distance thing, so that was kind of hard. I was in this school program that was way more rigorous than anything I'd experienced before. So that was a lot of stress and strain. I was in a weird living situation where I had this roommate, and like we did not get along, but it just wasn't a good fit. And so I was very lonely in that situation. And I'd also been going through a situation where one of my closest friends at the time, we had a big fight and stopped speaking right before I moved. Now, fortunately, I will say that she and I have made up, and she's one of the best people in the world. And I'm so grateful to the fact that like we've been able to work through that. But at the time I was really missing her friendship and her support. And so I was just really like very lonely. I would definitely call that a period of depression in my life. I remember one time I had just gone to the gym, which was like a campus gym. So there's all these, I'm 32 years old, and there's all these like, 19-year-olds running around at the time. And I just finished working out, and I sit down and I'm listening back to the Wonder Years. I'm listening to I Just Want to Sell Out My Funeral. And the line, he's talking at the end, I just want to know that I did all I could with what I was given. And I'm just like, I just start crying like on this bench in the gym. Just because I was like suddenly realizing like that I hadn't allowed myself to feel a lot of the things that I had been feeling. And so Nick from Hit the Lights, he did a solo acoustic show with like a bunch of like locally bands in Dayton. Dayton's about an hour drive from Columbus. And it was at this weird little like tiny venue that was not even really a venue. It was, there's a weird thing I don't think it even exists anymore. It was a place where I guess you could go to take classes, like a gym sort of, but you would learn how to be a professional wrestler. Like it had rings set up, and like I guess they taught classes and they did matches. Like think of like a boxing gym or like an MMA gym where you go how to learn that, except this they teach you like how to jump from the turnbuckle or whatever, like that, like, and how to do the bumps and fall on the canvas or whatever. So I'm not a wrestling guy. I don't know if I'm saying these things correctly, but like it was that. And then they also had like a little stage set up where there were like local bands playing, and Nick from Hit the Lights played an acoustic set. And that was really a great moment for me because it was just like it was familiarity when I needed familiarity. And I remember going up to Nick afterwards and just being like, hey man, like, thank you. Like, you don't know what it means. Just that, like, I just needed I needed that right now. And he was really cool about it. Almost, how do I put it? I think it probably, I remember he was really cool about it, but I was also like, I might be being a little too sincere right now. Like this might be a little much for him, that's a lot to put on somebody. But so that's just kind of one moment in specific. But in terms of like a band that has been that thing, that I think has carried up the legacy, has, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, got to tour with Gaslight, which is, they definitely did. I know they did. And I believe over, I don't know if they played in the UK shows, but I know it was over in Europe, which is Spanish Love Songs.
Oh, yes. They've come up a lot.
I love Spanish Love Songs. I found them really, really accidentally. Some blog that I was reading was talking about them. The first song I ever heard by them was Joanna in 5 Acts, which I'm not sure, but I think it's about the death of a grandparent. I'm assuming grandmother. That's kind of the way this song reads to me, but I don't, know specifically. So I don't know if that's 100% accurate. And they just had like everything I was looking for. And it was kind of spring, summer of 2019. It was right before my wife moved out to Ohio. They played a show. Like it just happened to be like, I heard this band, I started listening to them. I'm like, this is great. So I did that thing that I think everybody does when you first find a band. You want to hear everything by them immediately all at once.
Yeah.
And I was like, are they playing around here anytime soon? And they were playing also in Dayton at this like tiny bar with this band that I like. I haven't listened to enough of them. I don't know if you know them, Iron Chic.
I don't know Iron Chic, actually.
Okay. I think they're from like,
putting that on the list,
maybe Long Island or whatever. Chic spelled CHIC. And they're pretty good. And they were going to there was some festival that was going to be in Ohio, like a punk rock campground or something like that, but they were just kind of playing shows on the way through, and they were playing in Dayton. So I went out to the Dayton show. It was this bar that was maybe 50 people there, if that. Like, I'm talking the whole bar, not even just the area watching the show. I remember while the other bands were playing, before Spanish Love Songs played, the bar had on, like, the TVs. It's an Adam Sandler movie where he like goes to Africa on like a safari with his family. I think it might also be Drew Barrymore. I couldn't even tell you, but it was just like really silly. And then Spanish Love Songs played in there, and they're phenomenal. And there's a song that they have on their album Schmaltz, which is called Bellyache. And there's a line at the start of the after the first chorus, and he says, I've been dreaming in languages I don't understand. I've got spirits watching over me. They refuse my filthy hands. And it's just like hearing that. And again, this is a time in my life when I was feeling very much, I was feeling a lot of guilt, I'd say, about a lot of things related to, feeling like I had never been enough in this last relationship, but also that, like, what if I had tried harder, while also feeling some guilt because I'm in this new relationship that is wonderful, and there's this wonderful person. And I'm like, am I at risk of not giving enough attention or of myself to her because I still have to work through these emotions from the last one? And I had a lot of guilt. I can say that the issue that I had with my friend, and we weren't talking at the time, it was a misunderstanding, but it was really something that I made worse, and I wasn't trying to, but we were just not communicating well. And I pushed things in a way that I shouldn't have. And so I had a lot of guilt, and it took me a long time to realize that. And so I had a lot of guilt about that. And so just, hearing that at that time, like this again, self-reflection, a person searching for meaning, and a person searching for, like, because there's the other part of that song where he says, can't even go down to the river, stick my fucking head in it. He's talking about, like, trying to wash off these sins, right? This idea of, like, trying to cleanse yourself and not being able to do it. And I really also, like, at that point in time, like, I think I related to that. And Spanish Love Songs has also been a band that I've grown with. They're the one band I'd probably say ever that's gotten to be pretty big that I can do the, like, I was in a room with 20 other people watching them, kind of thing. But I turned my wife on to them, and so we listened to them a lot together. And they've been a band that we've grown a lot with. And during COVID, one of the ways that a lot of bands, were making money was they were doing, like, the song shops. And so for one of our anniversaries, she had Dylan from Spanish Love Songs write a song, for us.
Oh, wow.
We had it play at our wedding when we got married a few months ago. And so we actually got to go. So weird situation. We eloped in April. There was a full eclipse in the US, and we were in the path of totality.
I heard about this. Yes.
So they did about an hour from where we were living in Ohio. There was a big mass elopement. And so we eloped under the complete full eclipse, which was great. And it was a really cool day. The only downside was that my family and her family weren't able to come because I had just gotten COVID. So, like, they weren't able to make the drive out. It's also right when I got, like, my job that brought me back to Jersey. So, like, it was all kind of tied in the same time frame. So it was just a really, really fun and exciting time. But then we had our big celebration, our big reception and like a vow renewal in New Orleans, which we did just this past October. And that we had the song that Dylan played, playing as she walked down the aisle. We also have in our rings, we have engraved Losers Forever, which is, obviously a line from Spanish Love Songs as well. So that's another band that's been really important and been great to grow with and see all the cool things that they've done, as well as, you know, and we actually, back in the spring, right after we eloped, we went to a show they played in Cleveland. And we stayed around after and like actually got to show Dylan and be like, yeah, we got these rings that say losers. Hey, remember that song you wrote for us? And he's like, yeah, I remember. And I'm like, cool. Like, you know, we're married now. And like, you know, we got this in our rings. And he was super nice, super appreciative. So
Wow. And you've actually given me three things that
please.
I can follow up with. Firstly, the film you mentioned is called Blended. Um,
Okay. I didn't actually even know what the name of the
I
movie
didn't even
was.
know it was a movie. It's got 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I'm I think it's a bit shit. So I'm going to
Okay. I mean,
presume.
it didn't look great with the sound off in a loud bar, but with like punk rock music playing. But
So that's one. Two, the Spanish love songs I've been a huge fan of as well. And I remember when Brave Faces Everyone came out in 2020,
mhm.
I would have been about 20, uh, living in a COVID world at
Yeah.
university, and I was just about to move and go into my third year, finish off all my dissertations and stuff. And I remember two songs being particularly impactful then, which was Self Destruction as a sensible career choice and
Mhm.
Optimism as a radical life choice.
Yeah.
And those two I always came back to, just knowing that I can always pick self-destruction as if I really need to, if I need a job, or some form of work. But that was that, and I think it's Schwartz, and then No Joy came out last year,
Mhm.
which was an exceptional album. I was a huge
Yes.
fan of that. But I'm also learning that the more I listen to you, the more surprisingly similar our experiences have been. Because last year I also had a friend who him and I got into a bit of a tiff, as you'd put
Mhm.
it in England, um, over things that, yeah, I'm not proud of. And the way he reacted, he's looked back on and wasn't happy with how it worked out. Basically, what happened, it should have been between like three people, and it compounded into involving like 20 who didn't need to be involved. Lost a lot of friends out of it, but ho hum. But what happened is that this friend, who we didn't speak for months and months, eventually I got a message from him, and we've hashed it out now. We're best friends ever. We're actually hosting an episode of something fairly soon on this
Oh, nice.
podcast. Um, but what we had is that he messaged me and apologized for the whole thing, and we both came back and said, look, that was really dumb. We handled that poorly. And someone he was working with had taken their own life at the time,
Mm.
and he said, with all of this going on, I can't imagine my life without you in it. And that sort of came, and then that was the message he sent me, and that was fairly impactful. And then, we're back to being best of friends now. And I think all that time I was listening to albums like No Joy, and I had one that I was listening to by a band called Previous Love. Don't know if you know
Mhm.
them. Would thoroughly
Mhm.
recommend. Um, and that was all about, you know sort of self depreciation, and not respecting yourself, and how to build yourself up from rock bottom. And it kind of, all of those albums sort of brought me to a point now where I can just talk about it fairly casually and know that there are other people who have been through very, very similar circumstances and have come out on top as well. I don't have a PhD, granted, but you probably put
Give
a
it
lot
time.
of
I was a lot older than I think you are when I got mine. So you have plenty of time to do it. And it's interesting you say that also, because even just to be a little bit more specific about your situation with your friend, a similarity there is that the now I was ultimately the one who apologized, but she was the one who reached out because she had basically said that she needed space, and I respected that. And then she lost her mom just from illness, and it was during the beginning part of COVID. And that was, I think, a reflecting time for her where she was like, she basically said that she was, reflecting on the frailty of life, and didn't want there to be bad blood. And I apologized. And the other thing was that I apologized when we started talking again. It was tenuous at first, which I respect that. I think she was protecting herself, and wanted to make sure that I'd learned from the situation. But as things got better, when I was finally a year later able to get vaccinated, and visit my family and visit home for the first time in like a year and a half, um, she was one of the people I got to spend time with. And I had promised her, I said, listen, when we get to see each other, like, I want to actually apologize in person because, like, I think I owe you that. And I did. And she was even like, you don't have to. And I was like, no, 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 like, it's really important to me, like, that I say this, like, you were right, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done this. And I'm just glad that we're able to be here now, you know? So I'm glad that it worked out for you and your friend, and it worked out for us too. And, you
Mm,
know, and I think the ability to, like, it's the hardest thing in the world, in my opinion. Well, one of the hardest things in the world. That's an exaggeration, but it's one of the hardest things for me, like the ability to, you know, have humility and to admit when you were wrong. It's also the most important skill, I think, to cultivate.
absolutely.
Um, and depending on, you know, the type of person that someone is, so for instance, you know, I don't mean to self-diagnose, and there's, you know, growing discussion about this thing, but you'll hear this talked about a lot: rejection sensitive dysphoria. And I am someone who's terrible with rejection, right? Like, I that's like, even compassionate criticism, like, I always take very personal. So it's something that's like taken a lot for me over the years to be okay with. So admitting I did something wrong, you are rightfully upset with me, and I just have to accept the length of time it's going to take you to recover from that, is really, really difficult for me. And I imagine, you know, that's a difficult thing for most people, but it's something that if we can get to a point where we can do that and have those conversations, and being on the other side of it, you know, it sounds like with you and your friend, there was also some amount for both of you, and definitely for me and my friend, being able to say, she was able to treat me with good faith, right? Like, when we talked and I was like, you were right, I was wrong, I shouldn't have said these things, I shouldn't have, I my reasons for doing so were my own, but it was like they were incorrect. She could have said, I don't care, we're never talking again, and it would have been fine. That's her decision. But, like, instead, she was like, okay, I care about this person, and I'm going to treat this person with an amount of good faith. And that's the thing. If we, like, you know, I'm not trying to be all kumbaya about it, because the world's not always like that. But I just think that, like, if we can give each other, if people deserve the benefit of the doubt, and we can give it to each other, and then we can also get better at being like, you know what, I was wrong, sorry. There's so many I'm not saying we'd lose all conflict, but we'd go from, like, here to, like, here, you know. and
It,
and, and anytime we can move the needle, it's a good
it
thing.
would solve a lot of problems, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And that's something I had to learn as well. Like, I'm very similar to you. I'm very personal. Like, I take a lot of a perceived criticism is what they called it. Like, even though people might just make one small comment about something, I
Yeah.
will take it as this is direct criticism at me. And I'm not perfect. It's where most of my anxiety comes from, but that it's something that everyone can improve on. But I remember something my dad told me. He might have nicked this from somewhere, so if it's somewhere else, I apologize, but it's what he told
No
me.
worries.
And he said, like, you are a people pleaser. I was like, yes, I know about that. I'm well aware. And he said, well, you need to understand that. Let's take this for example. You're at a farmer's market, right? And you
Hmm.
go to the stall where all the peaches are.
Hmm.
And he said, everyone could come to this stall, and you could be the best peach, A plus, best peach in the world. Everyone looks at it and goes, "That is the single greatest peach I've ever seen. I'm going to take that home and nibble on that." And that's perfect. Anyone who loves a peach thinks you're the best peach. But if someone comes to that farmer's market, that stand, and goes, "I don't like peaches," there's nothing you can do. There's nothing that will change their mind to think that you are the best thing in the world, because they don't care right from the start. And that sort of that kind of analogy, my dad is surprisingly wise when he wants to be, and surprisingly idiotic when he wants to be, but that was one of his
Sure.
moments. And it summarized it so well, in that you can't make everyone happy. It's just a fact. And
Yeah.
as long as you can make the most amount of people happy, if you take a utilitarian approach and say, I'm going to make the most amount of people happy that I can without ignoring my own needs, then you can't really argue with your own efforts. And you can always try and do better. But as long as you can see yourself as, I am doing the best that I can to the most amount of people, then that is the best you can do, and no one can take that away from you.
I completely agree, and I also just want to emphasize the one thing you also said there at the end is trying to do better. You know, it's no one's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, and the to me, you know, I think it's just important to be able to say when we make mistakes and that I'm going to try to be better. There's been some times, you know, especially around that same time, you know, COVID, I did a lot of reflecting on different things in my life, and there were some people that I reached out to and apologized to, and there were some people from like many years earlier in my life, people that were like, oh, like that was unnecessary, and maybe it was, but it was something for me where part of being better for me was holding myself accountable, and recognizing like this is, I understand why I did this and it was wrong, the reasons, and I just want to let you know that I'm aware of that and I'm sorry for these things, because that's, you know, that's how we get better. And so, yeah, I think your dad's absolutely right. I've never heard that before.
Neither,
You know,
it's probably some old proverb that he nicked off Facebook, to be honest. But it made so much sense to me as well. My brain is very creative and weird. So
sure.
if you tell me something very directly, I probably won't take it very seriously. But if you work it with my mind and say something very elaborate and weird, I'll probably ironically understand it better than if you were just straight up with me.
That
So,
makes sense. And I'm not doing this to like as an intentional pivot, but going all the way back to, you know, what we were talking about with the Gaslight Anthem at the time
you're doing
in
my
my
job
life.
now.
Oh, here we go. At the time that I was listening to and first getting into that band and the 59 sound, I used to say, which was like not a very smart thing to say. I used to jokingly say, I wish every woman in the world was in love with me, right? And what I meant by that was essentially, you know, there was a lot of my life, especially into my early to mid 20s, where I kind of felt invisible to women. Even when I was like dating, I sort of also kind of still weirdly felt like sometimes invisible. Um, and and I think that was, and if I'm being respectful to past relationships and just the way that I was and people in my life, that was my shit, right? Like that was my stuff from growing up that I'd never gotten over. That was not their fault. They did not make me feel that way. It was like that was me. Um, and but the point that I'm getting at is similar to this peach metaphor. It was a lot of growing for me to be like, okay, but the every woman in the world and every man in the world and every other person in the world, like they don't have to be in love with you. That's not their responsibility. Other people don't exist to fix me. And number one, and number two, like not everybody is for everybody. And you know the quote unquote logic, the faulty logic behind this, I wish everyone in the world was in love with me, was kind of this idea where I was like, you know, I was sort of thinking like, well, if everybody found me attractive and if everybody loved me and wanted to be with me, then I would have the ability to filter them all out. But realistically, if someone doesn't find me attractive, if someone doesn't want to be with me, whether it's romantically, sexually, whether it's even just like as a friend or professionally or what, they're self-selecting, right? Like that's a decision that they're making, and that's valid. And so for me to be like, oh, it's only valid when I choose, no, that's not how it works. It's valid when they choose too. And again, that's a big growth thing. And again, I like your dad's metaphor, and it just reminds me of how I sort of saw myself at the time I was listening to Gaslight, hearing lyrics like I was kind of sort of wished I was someone else, because I was reflecting on like, is it a healthy mindset to have, to be wishing that I was the most attractive guy in the room? Or should I be focusing on the things that I can change and focusing on surrounding myself with the people who are going to see those parts of me? While also, you know, one other element balancing is I had just left college where I kind of finally found like the group of people who did see me in that way. And now it's like, you know, be jumping in the deep end with no life raft. Now it's like, oh, I've got to go be an adult and make money and have a job and also balance a personal life and meet all new people and figure out, are they going to see me in the same way?
And what was it? I think it was a Jaden Animations quote that she did, where it's like two people can be great, but just not mix well together.
Yeah,
And that's and that's
absolutely.
and that's okay. That is just how life works. You're not meant to be, part of everyone's life. And you can be tangential, you can be integral, you could be literally just a speck in their it's that whole idea of Sonder, where everyone has their own individual lives to, with the same detail as your own. And you could be just a tiny little side character in everyone's life. I mean, apparently, my brother always says that he's the main character in my life and I'm a side character in my own, which, is fair enough. I think they both said that. But it is that exact thing that you don't have to be perfect for everyone. I mean, I recently came out of a relationship as well, and I can try everything I can to make it work. But if there's nothing at the core, if it just dissipates and falters, then there's no point in forcing it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think part of growing up too is realizing, like, not just realizing that not everyone's going to love you and that you're not going to love everyone. You're not necessarily going to be main characters in everybody else's story and vice versa. But also, like, I felt like part of getting older was like just realizing like where those differences actually exist. And I guess what I mean is, like, I think back now and I'm like, again, maybe this is because of my Professor X memory or whatever, but like I will think about like, oh, I remember, so such and such a girl that I was friends with in high school and I had a big crush on her. And I'm like, why? We were friends, but we were so like, what would we have talked about? We had such disparate interests. We didn't like enjoy the same things. We had, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes getting older and growing is realizing not just that like it's okay for not everyone to be a good match, but also why it's okay for not everyone to be a good match, and what does being a good match look like to you, right? And so, like, I think that there are some people that are like, oh, I don't have to like the same music as my partner, and I think that's totally valid. I'm very lucky that I'm with a partner who we do like the same music a lot of the time, but and that's and going to see live music and going to shows and things is something that's very important to both of us. So it's something we can bond over. So I think that for me, that would be an important thing. It's not important to everybody though. And so if I were to meet somebody who was really into, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but a genre that I really do not particularly enjoy is country music, particularly American country music, which has a lot of weird social and political stuff tied up in it. If I were with someone whose idea of a summer weekend is going to a tailgate at a stadium where, Zach Brown band is playing, that's not my idea of a good time. And that person and I probably aren't going to get along. Now, is it possible that, like, if that's only a small part of that person, could we be compatible? Maybe, but like, why would I again like select into something where I know that there's going to be this barrier between us when there's also potentially people in the world who I can, again, this isn't even just, I want to be very clear to any of your listeners, like, I'm not even just talking about like dating. I'm even talking about like friendships and stuff, find the people that you like to spend. Now it's easier in friendships if my friends want to go to a Kenny Chesney concert without me, and then we'll hang out and grab a drink next week sometime. Like, cool. That's not as much of a thing as like when you're, with somebody for the long term, but nevertheless, like, just making sure that the people that you're around are people that you have things in common with and that you have that compatibility with, or else you're going to constantly be looking for something more.
Sorry, I was just opening my non-alcoholic beer.
Oh, interesting. I'm actually going to hold on one second. I'm going to grab myself a Coke Zero.
Oh, go for it.
I'll tell you one thing that I love about Europe. You guys are big on the Coke Zeros and not
you have no idea, bro. You have no idea. I've got tons of it downstairs. Well, cheers to that.
Cheers.
One thing I was going to follow up on with what you said actually is hanging around with specific people. Because going back to what I was saying about the situation with that friend, of the friends I lost, a lot of they won't listen to this because they hate me now. But I have so much insight now into those people, and I know that when I was with that, like, I don't drink anymore, and it's been a big thing about this podcast for a while. Hence the non-alcoholic punk IPA, because I'm a cultural man.
Brewdog?
Yeah, man, I'm all over it. I got given it. I got given it as a Secret Santa. They gave me 8 of them, so I'm casually getting through them.
So we had Brewdog a lot in Ohio, and specifically the Columbus area. And the things, one of the things that Columbus was a cool enough place to live. But the one thing that was pretty cool is that there's, you know, I don't know if they're building more in the process, but of the 2 Brewdog hotels that I know exist, there's Edinburgh and there's Canal Winchester, which is 20 minutes outside Columbus.
That's so
And
weird.
I've not stayed at either, but I've been to both. So that's pretty cool.
You've been to the one in Edinburgh?
Oh, I've been to Edinburgh 3 times. We were supposed to be going for New Year's this year for the 4th.
Oh, wow.
But I love the UK and I love Scotland. Edinburgh is my favorite city. So
I've never been. It's one on my list that I need. I went to Glasgow, but I never went to Edinburgh. It's one that I need to go and see.
I haven't been to Glasgow, interestingly. And
there you go.
We have very good friends in London, and they've never been to Edinburgh either. They were ideally, had we gone, they were going to come hopefully to New Year's with us, but one of our dogs has some health conditions, so we decided to stay around here for the holidays. But it's just funny because, again, Edinburgh is like, I love that city. And you know, whenever they talk about it and they're like, oh yeah, we've never been, I'm like, you guys could get on a train and be there in like 4 hours.
Yeah, I know. That's what I thought. Well, if you're ever around in London, let me know, because I live about 20 minutes away and we can.
Oh, nice. Absolutely. I mean,
I'll show you the sites or
we'd be
whatever's
there at
around.
some point. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt when you.
No, it's fine. If anything, I like hearing that people like my country, because I don't. No, I kid. I like the UK. It's just a very strange place. But what I was going with prior to that was how I gained so much insight with these friends, because I'd just come out of university. We'd been friends for years and years, and you almost are friends with these people out of, I don't really know the word, but almost because you have to be, almost like out of obligation, because you've known them for so long. And the guy who I'm meeting over the weekend, his best man was meant to be a guy he's known for 20 years for his wedding that's next year. And since that whole thing kicked off, they just haven't spoken. And I said to him, I was like, you need to understand that all the choices that these people have made, they have done with the intention of doing so. And when I was hanging out with them, they would heavily encourage people to drink too much and that's basically all they do. They just hang out in pubs, and that was not good for me as someone who drank too much anyway. Thankfully, I don't know how many days it is now, but it's nearly 500 or so. It's been nearly a year and a half. Thank you. But it's been, a long progress. I wanted to do all of 2024, and I don't have contact with these people anymore. And everyone who I work with, everyone who I spend time with is very aware of the change that I've made, and is very supportive of it. And it goes back to what you were saying about being around the right people. Like your value is very much found with specific people who know who you are. And when you choose the friends that you have, and you're not just hanging out with the people that you feel obligated to, your value is, goes up exponentially as a result of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, first off, it's great to hear that you have that support in your life. I can't speak from experience, obviously, but from what I've heard from people who speak publicly about it, is, I know that the drinking culture is a very specific thing where you are, and so not everybody is super supportive of that. So again, like, that's great that you have that support in your life. But the other thing I was going to say is that I think, going back to what I was even saying about like self-selecting, like when people think that they have more of a say in your life than they should, which is like, I mean, aside from like immediate family, spouses, things like that, like not a lot of people really should have much of a say in your life. But when people, I work with a lot of people, a lot of my students, a lot of the communities and organizations we work with deal in substance use disorder. And when people tell their families and their family or families, friends, coworkers, whoever it might be, and they're like, I think I have a problem and I want to stop doing this. And a person's like, well, you don't have a problem, basically telling them that they know them better than themselves. And like, the thing is, if someone were to say to me, I think I have a problem with this, I don't want to do it anymore, or I'm not going to do it anymore, whatever, however they want to bring it to me, it's not my position to say, yes, you do, or no, you don't. I could tell you the DSM definition of substance use disorder, but if that person is saying, this is how I feel and I'm not going to do it, that doesn't matter. It's not my position to chime in and pass any type of judgment. Even if it's a person who I've only ever seen drink one beer in 10 years of friendship or something. I don't know, some example I'm just making up. But like, if that person's like, I think I have a problem, I'm not going to do it. It's not my job to convince them otherwise. It's my job to say, okay, what do you need from me? Have I done anything? Do I ever put you in circumstances where you feel like that might be a problem? And if the person says, no, just keep doing what you're doing, great. I'm here if anything changes, you know?
Mm. Your work comes up a lot. I mean, I imagine that there's so much to discuss about that on its own. That could be a whole other episode. But you mentioned fairly early on that you do think there's a fair link between a lot of music and the work that you're in. Do you feel that there's a connection to a lot of the music you listen to that's just coincidentally sort of linked in with the kind of work that you do, or is it just...
I think overall it's just people find their meaning. I'm a person, I was thinking about this, in preparation for our conversation today, like what my relationship with the genre was. And like as a young person, I grew up in a house where my mom was pretty strict about the music that we listened to, my sister and I, in terms of this is maybe a dumb question, but like a US UK thing. Do you guys do like the parental advisory stickers like we do? Is that a thing?
Yes,
Or do you have anything like
we
that?
do. Yes, we
Okay,
do.
cool. I genuinely didn't know if that was a thing, because I know that in like the late 80s and early 90s here in the US, it was such like Congress had like
Yeah.
hearings about it and stuff. So I did not know if it was like as big of a thing over there. So the rule in our household was you're not allowed to listen to anything with a parental advisory sticker. But the sub rule was my mom also has like ultimate authority on what we're allowed to listen to. So even if it doesn't have a parental advisory sticker, but it still has things that she finds objectionable, then like we're not allowed to listen to it. I remember I don't remember how old, and my sister she like borrowed a CD or a cassette from like one of her friends, or maybe got it from the library or something. It was a Stone Temple Pilots album, and my mom, which I don't even think she was necessarily into, but she just, I think, her friends were listening to it and told her to check it out, and she wanted to like make her own like dubbed tape of it. And my mom looks at the lyrics and says, this is just about like doing heroin. Like, I don't want you listening to this, So, that was kind of the vibe in my house. So for me, even any interest that I had in punk rock music was, I think, in my mind, a little off limits, because in my mind, punk music was loud, angry people yelling about like the government and like cursing, right? And which some of it is, and that's fine. As an adult, I'm like, yeah, I don't care. Like, cool. I listen to some of that now. I yell about the government too now. But at the time, I just kind of thought it was this world that I didn't have access to. I didn't realize that there was something that counted as like emotional punk rock, right? And I this is another moment that I remember really specifically. Is I was a freshman in high school, and I was really into, this is the fall of 2000. And so this is the height in the US, at least, of like the nu metal and rap rock like thing, right? And so my favorite bands at the time that I was downloading off Napster because they cursed and didn't want my mom to know, I was like, had like Korn songs and Limp Bizkit and things like that. And I had really gotten into POD, right?
Oh yes, they did Alive, didn't they? I love that
Yes,
song.
this is before that album either. They had an album before that was called The Fundamental Elements of Southtown, and the one big hit, they had a couple singles off that, but they had a song called Rock the Party. And it's all about just like rocking out with your friends, and it's like a rap rock song, and it's got the like the turntable scratches and everything. And they were a Christian band too, and I grew up Catholic, and so like to me, I'm like, you're speaking my language. It's got rap, it's got rock, it's got Christianity, like, so I thought it was like subversive in that way, which like in retrospect, I'm like, no, they're fine. No disrespect to those guys, but it was just like, it kind of, it's what a 14-year-old would think was subversive. And I go to school one day and I'm wearing a POD t-shirt, and I go into Spanish class, and there's a kid in front of me named Adam, and he's wearing a Midtown shirt. And we're like kind of just talking. We were friends, or at least friendly, and we're talking or whatever. but he's like being a little bit of a jerk, and he's like, hey, you know, POD sucks. And I look at his
Such typical
shirt.
14-year-old
I
banter.
know. And you know, he's wearing this Midtown shirt, and I don't think, I don't, maybe if I'd heard him talk about it, maybe I was just intuiting that Midtown was a band. I don't know, but I was just like, well, Midtown sucks, because he's wearing that on his shirt. And he's like, have you ever listened to Midtown? And I was like, no. And he's like, okay, well, why don't you go home and actually listen to Midtown? And if you still think they suck, well then, I don't know, you're wrong, you know, basically. And I was just like, okay. And I go down, I go home from school, and I download a Midtown song on Napster, and I click, for anyone listening who's too young to have known like what the good old days of file sharing was like. It was just this thing. We had a search bar, and I just type in Midtown, and all these songs come up, and I just start clicking them to download, because I don't know which ones are the good ones, right? I'm just clicking whatever, and they all start downloading, and the one that downloads the fastest, so it's just the one that I happen to by chance hear. The first song that I hear by Midtown it's on their first album, Save the World, Lose the Girl, and it's called Such a Person. And it starts with it's with just vocals, and this little, like, I don't know if it's guitar or bass. If it's bass, it's a higher thing. If it's guitar, it's a little bit lower. And there's just a little vocal line for maybe 20, 30 seconds with the music, and then there's like a snare hit, and then the song kicks in, and it's like your typical like punk rock like beat, and they're singing about like being into girls and girls not liking them back. And I was like, I didn't know this existed. Like, this is a whole, like, it was just like this like world opened up for me. And there's a line in that song where he says, you're such a person, wake up every morning with her name in your head. And I was just like, oh my God, like at that moment in time, it was this whole other thing. So that was kind of like how I got into, that was sort of my first foray. And it wasn't like immediately like, this is all I listen to now. It was over time, you know, hearing about this band, hearing about that band. But what I started as I got more and more into like the music that I listened to and still listen to, what's really struck a chord with me was the stuff that was pushing back against the status quo and had this sense of justice to it. So, you know, a few years later, Thursday puts out War All the Time, which was the first album I listened to by them. And you've got, you know, the opening track of that album, For the Workforce Drowning, is specifically aimed at, you know, corporate type jobs and just following in our parents' footsteps because we think that that's what we're supposed to do. And there's a song on that album called Asleep in the Chapel, and it's about like losing your religious faith. And there's a song about, which I didn't even realize entirely until years later, there's a song called Steps Ascending, where it's about, I guess, you know, Jeff Rickley, the singer, one of his friends growing up, I don't know if it was the friend or the friend's brother, but there was basically a loaded gun in the house and the kids were playing with it and one shot the other and died. Like, so there's like all this social commentary in these bands that I start listening to as I'm going, and now I'm getting a little older in high school, right? Like junior and senior year, I'm like 17, 18 years old. And so for me, there was this connection to, you'd go to these shows and you'd meet people and everyone's there to see the same bands and there's community there. And then you start to listen to the messaging, and a lot of these bands come from, you know, and punk itself comes from this place of adopting, whether it's because the people making the music have been put in a subaltern, marginalized social position, or they're assuming a position of allyship with that. I'm like, oh, all the things that I care about socially and all the things like a sense of justice in the world for people of different cultures and different ethnicities and genders and sexualities, and like all this stuff is at the core of this music. So I'm like, cool, great. Like, I don't ever have to worry. I mean, you know, I know individuals in fan bases as well as different individuals in different bands have different opinions, but generally speaking, like going to a a show of the music that I listen to, I don't necessarily have to worry that there's going to be something like that happens or is said or done there that is really awful and goes against my values. And I mean, like, I remember when it was right after, so here's another little like gaslight story. I went to the shoot for the video for 45 when they put out Handwritten in 2012. They shot that at the Stone Pony, and I went, and then it was like it was right around that time, either right before that or right after that. I don't exactly remember, but right around that time, I remember is when Laura Jane Grace from Against Me came out as transgender, and she was announcing that she was publicly transitioning. And I remember, obviously a lot of people in the punk rock scene were getting asked about it. And Brian Fallon from the Gaslight Anthem, who was, at the time, I don't know if he still does, but at the time he was very public about his identifying as a Christian. He was kind of like, I don't care. It's rock and roll music. She's going to live her life. Like, he was very supportive. And then when they put out Get Hurt a couple years later, like they took Against Me on tour and stuff. And I know Benny, the drummer, toured and played in Laura's solo band for a while. Like, they were always like really supportive of those types of things. And so for me, that was really great. And then when I got into social work, I'm like, cool, here's a whole profession of people, not only who care about this stuff, but whose job is to move the needle in this way and fight for this type of justice and these fight against these social iniquities. And so, for me, it was a very natural fit. I'm not saying that I think social workers should listen to punk rock music. I'm not saying that if that's your thing, like if you have something you enjoy, I'm not trying to take it away from anybody, but it's more so for me, it was this nice alignment of my professional values and my personal values. And also, like, again, I can turn on the things, I can go to my office and turn on music and while I'm grading papers or whatever, and like know that the things that the bands that I listen to care about are the things that my students care about, or the things that I care about are the things that my colleagues care about. So so I know there's a very, very long-winded answer, but my
That's
point
great.
is just it's less about that. I think that there's a natural connection there, that and I don't even want to imply in any way that like my interest in those things and in punk rock or pop punk or whatever broadly like pushed me to social work. I think I'm just very fortunate there's a nice alignment in the things that I care strongly about. And I would hope that people in like mental health fields like social work, like counseling, and things like that, if they can find that, it's great. I'm not saying that I think it's a thing that they have to find, but if someone has the opportunity to, like, if it's a thing that they enjoy and they have that, it's a nice thing. It makes it a lot easier because, like I said, I don't have to worry about compromising in certain aspects over others.
You reminded me of a story of Hit the Lights for me, actually, with
Okay,
those
please. I'd love to hear it.
so I must have been 15 when Summer Bones came out, which is my
Nice.
favorite album of theirs.
Great album.
And the first song on that album is famously Fucked Up Kids.
Yes.
And obviously I must have been 15 at this time, and I asked my mum and I said, "Can I have this album by a band I really like?" And she went, "Oh yeah, I'll get it for your birthday." And she came to me about a week before my must be my 16th birthday and
Mm-hmm.
said, look, I know you're 16, you're going into sixth form or a senior year for you. Um, but I've just seen the first song. I've just seen the first title." And I went, "Yeah, I thought this would come up." And we had a nice long discussion about how it's not actually that bad. It's a really good song. And I showed it to her. She was like, "Oh yeah, like it's not my thing, but I can see why you like it. Just don't go around using this language in the house." And I was like, "Yeah, that's fine by me." But when you were saying about that, like you can have songs like Fucked Up Kids where you talk about being stupid when you were younger, and
Mm-hmm.
even stuff this year, the kind of variation you get in the lyrics and the themes are, as you were saying, just it's so interesting. I think even just this year alone, you've had the entire Analysis Paralysis by 4 Years Strong, which talk a lot about anxiety and dealing with your own beliefs and your own thoughts and feelings. You have Waiting Room by Real Friends, which is about someone dying in the hospital. But then you've also got like Neck Deep, who did We Need More Bricks, which is an inherently political punk song about the UK
Mhm.
politics. But then also you've got songs that go back. Party Hard by Andrew WK, which is
Oh, I
just
love.
a really dumb song about drinking beer and being stupid at a party. The
I
variation
I
there is brilliant.
I love Andrew WK. I think that it's such a fascinating thing. I'm going to come back to Andrew WK real quick. I just want to tell a quick thing related, similar story to your fucked up kids story. Real quick. So when I was in like middle school, the Green Day album, was it Nimrod or Insomniac? It was whichever the one that has Time of Your Life on it, was out.
I believe that's Nimrod.
Okay.
I'm
It's
going
the
to
one that
fact
has,
check
I know
though.
the faces that with the yellow circles over them, like on the cover. And we were at Walmart.
It is Nimrod,
Okay, perfect.
1997.
Thank you for looking that up. This was probably a year or two after that. This was probably like 98, 99. But I was like, I was a kid when Green Day like really happened, and a lot of kids at my school were listening to Dookie, and then I think Insomniac might have been the next one or whatever, and then Nimrod. And so it was something that I always kind of felt left out of. And so I wanted that album, and we bought it at Walmart, which was like, a 5-10 minute ride down the road from our house. And you know, as I mentioned a moment ago, no parental advisory stickers allowed, but also my mom had, right of refusal. And so we're driving home, and I'm looking through I open it, I'm looking through the lyrics booklet, and I'm immediately seeing like swears and curses, and I'm like, oh, she's not gonna let me. So we walk inside, and I'm like, hey mom, like, sorry, like this is the thing. And she's like, well, I'm gonna go return. She looked at a couple of the songs, and she's like, I'm gonna go return this to Walmart. And and I felt bad because I opened it, because I'm like, oh, they might not take it back now. So she goes to Walmart, and she's like, hey, my son opened this, but like it has language that I'm not a fan of, and I was hoping, here's my receipt, we just bought it like 20 minutes ago, I want to get this returned. I wasn't there for this. My mom, because Walmart was right down the road, and my dad was probably home, she's like, let me go return it. So the way she described what happened was, she goes to the electronics department, she shows the lady and says like, hey, is there any way I can get my money back? And the lady says, well, listen, Walmart censors CDs. We censor our albums. And so the curses are blurred out. And my mom's like, really? And she goes, yeah, let me see here, give me the CD, I'll pop it in, tell me what's one of the tracks that has like a lot of cursing. And my mom looks through the lyrics books. Oh, this one. Like, I think there's a song called The Grouch where there's a lot of like cursing on it. And she goes, perfect, track 5, 6, whatever it is. So the woman puts it in a CD player, cranks the volume up, hits number 5, hits play. It was not censored, and just suddenly cursing is just like blaring out in the middle of Walmart. And the lady, I guess, got so like, I'm so sorry, here's your money back. Like, please don't stop shopping with us. Like, it was just, I wish I had been there to see it, but my mom she actually thought it was so funny
That is great.
at the time. But the other thing I was going to say just about Andrew WK, I think you're a bit younger than me. So you might not know this, or might not be aware of this, or maybe you are, maybe some of your listeners aren't. I was just talking about this with my wife the other day. So Andrew WK had a very, very brief-lived TV show in, like, I want to say maybe 2004, 2005. And it was called Your Friend Andrew WK. Andrew WK. It was on MTV or MTV2. And what the premise of the show was, I don't even know how many episodes they did. I only ever saw one episode. The premise of the show was Andrew WK would help people with their mental health.
Mm.
And so people could write letters to Andrew WK, like Dear Abby style. Dear Andrew WK, can you help me with this? And the show was, music videos would play. And then while the music videos were playing, in the like sides of the screen, the letter would come up that the person wrote to him, and then his response would come up. And so you could see like what the person's problem was and how he was suggesting that they could solve it. And then in between the videos, they would shoot Andrew WK choosing one person to actually help with his problems. And he goes to some guy's house in like I don't know, like Long Island or something. I don't remember where it was. And it was, this guy had written this letter basically talking about being really depressed and and basically feeling kind of lonely. And I remember Andrew WK went to his house and like talked to him for a while and just listened to him and was really like compassionate to him. And then they went to like an arcade and were playing like skee ball and basketball and like video games and stuff. And that was like, he's like, life is fun, man. Let's go have fun. And they just like go out. And, I don't think it cured this kid of his depression, but I think it's a pretty cool story. And then the other side of that was a couple years later, he did briefly, he was doing like some, like, I guess you call it motivational or inspirational speaking. And there used to have a big festival in New Jersey every year that was called the Bamboozle Festival. And I went a lot of years, and where I went to college was about 20, 30 minutes away. And so the one year, I think it was my junior year, I went to the Bamboozle, and they were having Andrew WK do a motivational speech like before gates opened, like for the day. And I show up to this stage thinking like, he's going to play some songs though, right? You know what I mean? Like in my head, I'm like, he's actually going to, he's not just going to talk the whole time. They gave him like 90 minutes or something. At least they gave him at least an hour. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but they gave him a long time. He did not play a single song. He just talked the whole time. And he clearly did not have enough to talk about, because he, at a certain point, was just like inviting people onto the stage to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. Like clearly did not have his own enough stuff to talk about. He just kept talking about how like, you guys are here at a festival and the weather's nice, it's gonna be great, like all that kind of stuff, which was true, and getting us hyped up. And then he'd be like, does anyone have anyone they want to talk about, or anything they want to talk about? And two things I remember really vividly. The first one, maybe a little bit on the grosser side. This guy, he's like, does anyone have anything that they want to talk about? And some guy raises his hand, and Andrew brings him up on stage and goes, oh yeah, me and my friends are staying in a hotel that's just down the road for the weekend. So I want to apologize to my friends for what I did that last night. I left an upper decker in the toilet. And Andrew's like, okay, like, sorry to your friend for leaving an upper decker, whatever. So that's the one thing I remember. And then again, this went on for way too long. But like, I don't say that in a bad way. He kept his vibe the whole time, his party and positivity vibe. But it just went on like for a really long time. And at a certain point, he said something. There's not that many people. There's like 30 or 40 people there, but a small crowd. And he said something. I don't remember what he said. And I yelled something in response. I don't remember what I said. I just remember he said something, I said something. And he like must have heard me, because he pointed at me. He said, yes, that was great. Come on up here. You should talk more. Do you have something else you want to add? And I genuinely didn't. So, which is, if you've been listening to me talk, that's rare, but I didn't have anything I wanted to add. So I was like, no, thanks. So whatever. So a couple hours later, I'm in the festival. I'm walking around. I had just seen whoever play. I saw Hit the Lights play that day, but not till later. But I was walking around. I run into a friend of mine, and we're talking for a little bit. And while we're talking, I see Andrew WK walking by. He's got a couple security guards with him, but he's just kind of walking through the crowd. Don't know where he's going. And I say to my friend, "Oh, hey, I'm gonna go real quick. Like, say hi to Andrew WK. I'll be right back." And I, right as he's walking by, I walk over and I just go, "Hey, Andrew, what's up, man?" And I just like wave at him, and he's a few feet away, and he stops and he looks at me and he goes, "You're the guy that said that thing this morning in the crowd." And I was like, yeah. And he's like, that was awesome. And he gives me a big high five and then just keeps walking. And I was blown away, because I was just one face in a sea of probably, at that time, probably 50 or 60. And then later on in the day, there's thousands of people at this concert. He's a person that on a given day is seeing so many different faces. And he was like, you said that thing from the crowd earlier. That was awesome. And I was like, just that was like such a cool moment, because I was like, now I always liked his music, and I thought his whole positivity thing was like cool, but suddenly like I just felt like I understood how he'd gotten to where he'd gotten so much better, because I was like, oh, this is a guy that like really puts an effort into getting to know people and remembering things about them. And I just, I was really impressed by that.
He's
So
such a
nothing,
he's
nothing
such a
but love for Andrew
such
WK.
a cool
Yeah,
guy. I mean, but that just goes to show how intertwined these genres and something like mental health are.
absolutely.
There's such great people out there. I'd like to think this is part of that kind of dynamic of taking the music and positively impacting people. But I
Yeah.
know Andrew WK. First of all, he has a beard. Secondly, he's cool.
Yeah.
But he's just
I mean, I assume you're also not married to Kat Dennings, so
no, that is also untrue. I don't
I
know
don't
her
know.
very well.
I had a crush on her back in the days of the 40-year-old virgin. So I
Oh, I
mean,
forgot she was in that.
yeah, that is putting me at a very specific age bracket. I used to have this thing when I was younger where I'm like, if a female actor that I found attractive was like a similar age to me in my mind, I was like, maybe it'll happen someday.
We can dream. We can dream. Well, amidst all this, like we've covered so much today.
Hmm.
Particularly that Andrew WK one was a surprise. Just from Party Hard. What a great song.
Party hard, yeah,
Um, Obviously we've talked about a lot, and the Gaslight Anthem is the central crux of it all. But
sure.
as you know, where you stand now with your work and the music you listen to and all the stories you have, what is it that punk rock, or specifically the Gaslight Anthem, has taught you about yourself, or what inspiration has it given you to pass on?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's I know I talked about this earlier. It's just a matter of I'm gonna switch into to my teacher mode a little bit here for a second. So one
Oh
of the
yes.
things that the one of the classes that I taught this semester that we spend a lot of time on is um, a therapeutic orientation called solution oriented social work. It's not just social work. You can use it in a lot of different mental health fields, but solution oriented and solution oriented is different from other therapeutic modalities and things in the sense that, if you're doing a trauma based modality, you have to really break down the source of the trauma for the person and what got them there and how that trauma is carrying over into different aspects and elements of their life, and affecting them emotionally, affecting them mentally, affecting them physically. And that's really, really important. Solution focused has some benefit in trauma, although there's some debate between, people, whether how efficacious it is for trauma. Solution oriented social workers will also tell you that it's not a one size fits all. It doesn't fix everything, right? But what solution focused and solution oriented is it's a present and future oriented thing where you're coming up with goals collaboratively with your clients, and you're figuring out how you're going to get to those goals. And it's understanding the cycles of change and understanding where the triggers and the risk factors for relapsing in those original behavior patterns are, and figuring out how to disrupt them. And one of the things that I kept saying to my students, one of the things I really do like about it, and not to say that this doesn't exist in other modalities or other orientations, but one of the things that I like about solution oriented is that it is inherently a hopeful orientation, because you're looking at the here and now and you're saying it's going to get better and we are going to figure out what the steps are. And it may take a while. It may be something that we don't get to immediately, and it may be something that is different than what we always thought our lives were going to be. But we're going to make the decision to say, we're making a plan to get to we have an end goal, and we're going to make a plan to get from where we are now to the end goal. And that's a hopeful thing, because it requires the client, it requires the person who's making the change to believe that change is possible, and to believe that they can get to, not just that it's possible, but that it is attainable for that person, right? And so sometimes when we're dealing with mental health, when we're dealing with things like depression or anxiety, it's easy to take a deficit and fatalistic based approach where we think it's never going to get any better. I'm broken and I'm like this forever. And solution oriented says, or what if there's a day when you will wake up and you won't feel like this, and where you'll be able to remember where you were, and you'll be able to look back at it and see how far you've come. So that's there's a lot more to it, but that's solution oriented in part, in a nutshell. And I want to make the connection because when I think back on an album like the 59 Sound and where I was in my life, the 59 Sound had a similar vibe, right? It was a lot of that album is let's spend some time thinking about the past, thinking about people we've lost, thinking about relationships we had, thinking about times we were feeling like we weren't enough for the people around us. And then at the end, there's a song where it's like, now we can think about we can think about what beautiful stuff the future is going to bring for us. And again, I mentioned this earlier, there's the lyric, come July, we'll ride the Ferris wheel, go round and round and round, and if you never let me go, I'll never let you down. And then also at the end of the song, there's a really great, like, very kind of loud, again, it's a dynamic song, it builds up, and there's this big like outro, and he just kind of sings mixed, not even super loud in the song, like it's just sort of part of the overall music. He's saying, hold on, hold on, hold on, right? Like, you just have to keep holding on. It's going to get better. And we have to believe that there is a time when we will be the versions of ourselves and we will be in the situations that we want to have.
Wow.